Hi Dragonflies, welcome back to Dragonfly Spirit Studio. I'm Lynn Bauer. I sometimes use the free digital drawing and painting app Sketchbook Pro to help me make decisions about changes that I might like to make to a painting in progress, and also to quickly combine multiple sketches and move things around to think about compositions for a painting that I'm planning. Sketchbook Pro is a free app for Mac and Windows, iOS and Android. So all you have to do is go to where you normally download your apps and type Sketchbook Pro into the search box, and you'll find it there as a free download. So it should be available to pretty much all of you. Now, Sketchbook Pro does a lot of things that I don't need for the planning process that I use. And the manufacturer, Autodesk, has some wonderful tutorials. So if you want to dive deeper into Sketchbook Pro, I'm going to put the link down in the video description, and I'm going to ask you to please not ask me Sketchbook Pro questions, because pretty much everything I know about it is going to go into this video. But that's kind of the point of this video. If you go and look at the tutorials, there's all sorts of great stuff you can do with this program, but that's kind of overwhelming, and you don't need to wade through all of that to use it as I'm using it. So this is a tutorial on the teeny little piece that I use. 5 or 6 things are all you need to know to be able to use this as I'm using it. So I'm going to show you the few things that I use on the desktop version and the mobile version. There's slight differences there. And I'm going to ask that you please not ask me any other questions about Sketchbook Pro, because I probably won't be able to answer. But Autodesk has wonderful tutorials, and there are also lots of other tutorials here on YouTube if you really get excited about the idea of doing some digital drawing and painting and you want to explore that side of it further. So let's get started with the desktop version. When you first open up Sketchbook, you'll see something like this. We have this large white area, which is the canvas, or you can think of it as the paper that you're drawing on. And we have various tools up at the top and various tools over at the side and tools down in the corner, and that's kind of overwhelming, but don't worry, we're not going to use most of that. But we do actually have to add one more set of tools, so we're going to go up to the Window menu and then come down to the Layer Editor. And when you click on the Layer Editor, you'll get this additional window over here. And what this is the various layers in your artwork. So we have a background layer, and you can think of this as your piece of paper. And the reason this layer is separate is so that you can change the color of your piece of paper, but we're not going to do that. For us, we use white paper, so having a white background is a good idea. And then we have a layer sitting on top of the background, and you can think of these layers as a clear piece of plastic or acetate that lays on top of your piece of paper or your painting in progress, where you can test out changes, but if you take that layer away, then you haven't really changed anything. So before we can start thinking about changes we might want to make to a painting, we need to bring in an image of one of our paintings that we're working on. So I'm going to go up to this little icon that looks like 2 mountains in a square, and you'll notice that if I hover over the tools in Sketchbook, it conveniently tells me what that tool does. So that's kind of nice if you get lost and you've forgotten what things do. Hover your mouse and it'll tell you what that tool does. So this is the Add Image button, so I'll click on that. And it opens up a window that allows me to choose what image I would like to add. And I'm going to take this postcard from one of our postcard paint-alongs and think about whether I want to make changes to that. So I'll click Open. And now what happens is the postcard comes in and my cursor changes to this funny-looking round cursor. So this is the cursor that allows me to resize and rotate and position my image. So the center part that has the small square and the large square is the resize area of this cursor. So if I click and hold in that, then move my mouse up or down, it makes it bigger or smaller. So click and hold in the center, go up to make it bigger, go down to make it smaller. In the outer ring, this part allows me to rotate it. So if I brought the image in accidentally and it was sideways and I need to turn it around, I click and hold on that and I can rotate the image if I need to get it in the right position. The outer ring is the part of the cursor that allows me to move the image around. So if I click and hold there, then it allows me to move back and forth, up and down, and position this image where I want it to work on it comfortably. This top part allows you to squish or stretch in one dimension only, and that is not very useful for us, so I don't use that part. So when this cursor comes up, I just stay out of that area. I resize as needed, rotate as needed, move it around to position it, and then when I'm all done, if you click this little X, that gets rid of that tool. Another way to get rid of that tool is if you look up at the top, while this is highlighted, we were so busy looking down here, we never went and looked way up at the top of the screen. You'll see the tool that's in action is actually highlighted. So if I click on that, that also turns it off. So now we have our image of our painting in here, but the painting is in layer 2, which is on top of our clear piece of acetate, and we'd like them in the other order. So if you go to this little up and down arrow, that is the reorder layer function. So if I click and hold that, it allows me to pull this, drag this layer down and put it underneath my clear piece of acetate. So just click and hold, and I can move this layer around. It can be above, or where we really want it. We want it below. Oops, didn't go quite far enough. So now I have my photo of my painting on the bottom layer, and I have this clear piece of acetate on top. And whichever layer is highlighted is the one I'm drawing on. So I want to highlight this layer. I want to click in this layer and highlight the one that's on top so that I'm not drawing directly on my photo of my painting. So what do I want to do with this painting? Well, maybe I'm thinking about adding a little bit more shading down in the lower part of this cloud, or maybe I'm thinking about adding some more colors down here in the landscape, or maybe I'm thinking about adding a person over here. So to do that, we're going to use the drawing tools, which are over on this side, and I really only use 2 tools primarily because I'm not trying to create a digital watercolor. So I don't try to get in here and mimic exactly what a watercolor looks like. I'm trying to give myself a rough idea of what might happen if I made some changes. So I use the pencil tool to do little figures or draw small shapes, and I use the airbrush tool to lay in some veils of color to think about what I'd like to add a wash. So let's suppose we're wondering if we'd like to add another wash down here to just make the bottom part of this cloud a little darker. There are 2 little pots here that you can think of as your paint pot and your water pot. So this is actually the brush puck and the color puck in Sketchbook Pro language, but I think of this as my paint and this as my water, and here's why. If I click on the paint pot, I get a little menu that allows me to change colors. So in the outside part, I can go around and choose the hue that I want. So that sort of bluish color was actually pretty good. And then in this inner part, I can add some black to it to make it grayer, or I can add some white to it to make it lighter. So when I'm up in the top part here, it's like I'm adding white paint. So that's like adding an opaque paint to my brush. And so I don't use that very much unless I'm going to use gouache or acrylic or something. Instead, I'm going to stay in the lower part here and pick a color that I think I want to mix with my watercolor paints. And then if I move my cursor out of the pot, that color selector just goes away. And I'm going to come over here to this little water pot, and I'm going to change the opacity of this blue. So making it more opaque is like thicker paint, and making it less opaque is like adding water. So that's for us more useful than adding white, because if we want a light color, we want the stuff underneath to show through. So this puck is a little funny to use. When you click on it, it disappears. If you go up and down though and look at the bottom of the page, there's a little window that's telling you, oh, how opaque your color is. So I'm working with a pencil tool right now, so I usually make my pencil tool plenty opaque. If I let up on it and then click in here again and go right and left, that changes the size of the tool. So the pencil tool doesn't change size very much. So let me switch to the airbrush tool so you can see how that works. So I click in the brush puck and I move left and right, and you see a little sort of ghost image that shows how big it is, and at the bottom of the screen it tells me how many pixels I'm using with my airbrush. So I'm going to leave it about there. So click in the center, go up and down. This is changing the opacity, but for an airbrush it's called flow. So 100% flow means as much paint as it will put out, and that's more opaque, and you can see it getting paler as the flow gets smaller. So let's say we're going to not mix a very strong wash. We'll put it at 50%. And then when I come over to my painting, or anywhere actually, and click and hold on this, it's like I'm spraying with my airbrush. So I can add some color down here, and you can see I've chosen way too bright a blue, but that's okay because I'm going to show you how to change that in just a moment. And see, do I really want, well, I definitely don't want that color blue down there, but do I want to add some more or not? So I can go over to the layer menu, and the little eyeball here turns this layer on and off, or makes it visible and invisible. So if I click on this, it takes that away. Click on it, it brings it back. So I can go no, yes, no, yes, making the layer visible and not visible to kind of debate with myself, do I really like that change? Now, we decided that, oh gosh, that's really totally not the blue that you would want to put down there. So I don't like that, and I want to get rid of it. So there are two ways I could do that. I could just get rid of this layer and add a new layer. So if you click in the center of the layer, there are all these options that come up, and if you move your mouse around to the various options, it tells you what those do, and there's the delete layer option. So I could just say, no, that was a horrible mistake, delete that layer, and then click the plus button to add a new layer. And now I have a fresh sheet of acetate to draw on. If I draw on that one and, oh, I don't like that either, another way to undo what you just did is to use the undo function. So there is a red undo arrow up here, and I can click that and just undo it. So if you've done a lot of drawing on the layer and you want to get rid of it, then deleting the layer is probably the easiest method. If you just made a few brush strokes and went, whoa, wait, that's not a good color, then using the undo and redo arrows are a good way to get yourself back to wherever you want to start over. And that is one of the things that makes this really nice for planning, because it's very easy to go, oh, no, that's not the right color, undo that. Let me go over and try to adjust my color better. So when you open up this color window, one of the things I didn't talk about last time is this little eyedropper, and that's the color picker. So what I really would like to do in most cases is add colors that are already in this painting or that are on my palette, and not have to guess by trying to dial it in, which I did very badly. So if I click on the color picker, I get this little eyedropper, and then I come over here on my painting and click, and it magically changes my paint pot to that color, which is a much grayer color than I had chosen. And now I can go in and say, okay, so what about adding a little more. Well, I see that I happen to choose my eyedropper. I happen to choose a gray that was one of the paler grays here. So let's undo that. Go back and pick the eyedropper again. And one of the things that is a little tricky about the eyedropper at first is it's actually choosing 1 pixel. So I might be over here and choosing kind of a light colored one. I might be choosing a darker colored one. So you might have to fiddle around a little bit to get the right color. Let's try that. Oh yes, that's more of a dark gray, and that's going to give me a better idea of, do I want to add some more dark gray down here under this cloud. So of course this doesn't really look like a watercolor wash, but it gives me an idea of what would happen if I put in some more dark color down there, and then I can come over to my layer menu, turn it off, turn it on, kind of let my eyes squint a little bit or go a little out of focus to get a more of a general idea of, do I want some more dark color down there or not? Yes? No? Now suppose I'd like to try out adding a little silhouette of a figure underneath this tree, and I'm working on a trackpad, and that's kind of difficult to sketch on. So it would be nice if I could make this a little bigger so that it would be easier to work down there. I want to keep all of this stuff together the same size, so I'm going to go over here, and you can see right now this layer is highlighted that has the clouds on it, and I'm going to hold down the Shift key and click the next layer so that I've selected both layers, and then I'll go up to our resizing tool, click in the center, make it bigger, click in the outside edge and scooch it over so that I can get at my tree, and then I can get rid of that tool. And now I'm going to take my color picker, click in the paint pot, get my color picker, go over here and choose this sort of dark gray-green. Make sure I'm using my pencil tool. And I can either draw on the layer that has the clouds, or if I want to consider those two options separately, what I can do is add another layer on top, and now I can draw on this layer my little figure. So drawing with a trackpad isn't all that easy. It's easier with a mouse, but even with a trackpad, I just need to get a general idea of what it would be like to have a little figure under here, so I don't really need to be very precise. I just draw kind of a general idea of a figure. And I know that looks pretty crude, but that's probably enough for me to decide if I want to add that element or not. So now, again, I'm going to go over here, and using the Shift key, I'm going to select all 3 layers. I'm going to go up and select my resizing tool, make it smaller, bring it back over here where I can look at it, and then get rid of the resizing tool, and then I can make that layer invisible, turn it off, turn it on, turn it off, turn it on. Do I want the person or do I not want the person? And I can consider that decision separately from the bit about the clouds. So this allows me to test very quickly a variety of possible changes that I might like to make to my painting with not very much trouble at all. And if you are not great at sketching in little figures, or you want to put in a little building or something like that, I'll just point out that you could also bring in a photograph that you might have, and you could put that photo in one of these layers and trace a figure that you happen to have a photo of. So let me go over to our layer menu, and I'm going to turn all these layers off for now so I don't get distracted by them. And we'll add another image of some people and a dog on the beach. And now what I can do is throw in yet another layer. Take these 2 layers, go select my resizing tool, make them bigger, grab my pencil, and scribble right on top of this guy and just kind of fill in his silhouette. So all I need is the silhouette or maybe the outline. So if you feel like you can't draw very well figures, you can go grab a figure from a photo by doing this kind of sketching on top. And actually, if you want to, you can outline that figure, trace the figure, and use that to help you add it to your actual painting. So I'm just going to fill him in a little bit. So now I've traced him. Let's make everything back to a smaller size. Oops, I want both layers smaller size. Everything back to a smaller size. I'm actually going to get rid of my photo layer, so I'll click in the center of that layer and choose Delete Layer. And now I have this little guy, and I can put this guy into my painting. So let's turn our painting back on. And of course, he's not anywhere near the right place. So we need to grab him. So we're going to go up and make sure we've selected the layer that has my little sketch of the little guy in it. And I'm going to go up here and choose this thing that looks like a dotted rectangle with an arrow in it that says Select. And that's my selection tool. I'm going to draw a box around him, and then when I let up my cursor, he has now been selected. So now I can move him around with the Move tool. So I'm going to use that tool for moving and resizing things, and I can move him around and put him down there, and I can go, oh, he's a little too big. Let's make him smaller. Let's make him bigger. So I can see, you know, what would I think about putting somebody way in the foreground that's looking at this scene? What would I think about having a little guy underneath there? All with that same sketch. It's very easy for me to just resize him, move him. What if I put him over here? Would I like that better? Do I want him bigger over here? So this gives me lots and lots of ways to test ideas about paintings. What would I like to do? What changes would I like to make? And I can also just take these sketches and combine various sketches. I could say, well, what if I put this little guy into another sketch? I can bring in a sketch that I've done on paper. I can make a new sketch within Sketchbook if I have a comfortable enough tool to draw with, a mouse or something rather than a trackpad. So that's pretty much every feature of Sketchbook that I use, and it takes not too long to get comfortable with all of this. I know seeing it just once, it's probably going to be, okay, that looks cool, and I don't remember any of it. So you really have to get in there and give it a try yourself. So take this video, watch a little of the video, try a little piece in Sketchbook, pause the video, come back and forth. And I think fairly quickly as you start to play around with it, it becomes very intuitive and very easy. And you really don't need to know anything else about Sketchbook to use Sketchbook the way I use it as a planning tool. When I'm done working, if I want to save my work, I can go to the File menu, choose Save. This allows me to select where I'm going to save the image and the format. If I save it as a TIFF, I will preserve the layers. I can also save it in Photoshop versions if I happen to have Photoshop, or Pixlr if I happen to have that app. But for most cases, if I'm going to come back and work on it some more in Sketchbook, I will save it as a TIFF because that preserves all the layers as individual layers. If I save it as a JPEG, all the layers get squished to one layer, but this is the format that I might want to save it if I'm going to put it in my Photos app to refer to later, print it out, send it to someone in an email. So TIFF keeps the layers so I can work again. JPEG squishes the layers all into one, makes a smaller file if I'm going to send it somewhere. I actually don't care to save this, so I'm just going to click Cancel. In this section, I'm going to demonstrate the same features of Sketchbook Pro in the tablet version. I'm demonstrating on an iPad, and unfortunately I don't have an Android tablet to demonstrate with, but I believe the layouts are the same. However, if you're having problems with finding something on an Android tablet, I'll have to refer you to the Autodesk tutorials since I don't have an Android tablet to check things out. So we're going to begin, as we did before, by bringing in the image of a painting that we're considering making some changes to. So to do that, I'm going to click the Add Image button, which will take me to my photos, and then I will select the photograph of the painting that I'm interested in making some changes to. And before I go anywhere else with this, before I click Done, I might want to resize or rotate the image, especially if I've brought in the image and I discover, oh, I took this picture sideways. So to do that, I use this icon right here, which is the Transform tool. So I can use gestures to resize and rotate the image. I'm just using 2 fingers on the screen to drag it and position it as I like. If I need to do some fine tuning, I can use these little arrow buttons to nudge it 1 pixel over, or I can simply use my fingers to reposition it. When I have it where I want it and in the orientation that I want, I will click Done. And now, if we look over on the right-hand side, this is the Layers menu, and you can see we have the background layer, and we typically won't do anything with this. This is so we can change the color of the background, and since we work on white paper, leaving it white is usually a good idea. And then we have a layer that is empty right now. You can think of an empty layer as like a clear piece of acetate that you can put on top of something to draw on it. So we'd actually like our empty layer on top of the layer that has the image of our painting, so that when we draw on it to make changes, we're not making those changes directly to the photograph, we're making them to the clear piece of acetate that we've laid on top of our photograph. So to move this layer up, all we need to do is click and hold in this layer and then drag it up above, and now we have our photo layer and our empty layer laying on top of it. Whichever layer is highlighted is the layer you're drawing on, so before you start drawing, make sure you've highlighted your empty layer. Now, as far as drawing tools, I use pretty much just 2 tools to decide if I want to make changes to my painting. And you can delve deeper into the remaining tools either by playing around with them or by using the Autodesk tutorials. Check the link in the video description. But I am only interested in using typically the pencil tool to make little sketches and the airbrush tool, which I use to give me an idea of whether I'd like to lay in a wash of color. So let's start with the airbrush tool, and let's ask ourselves perhaps if we'd like to add a little bit of darker wash to the lower part of these clouds. Now, on the right side, you have a little oval that shows the tool that you're using, and it shows the size and kind of a visual reference of how opaque that tool is in the top. And then in the bottom is the color selector, and I think of this as my little pot of paint. So I don't want to work with black paint. Let's click in that little circle, and that gives us a menu that allows us to select colors. So in the center, I'm adding white or black to my color, so I can make it lighter by adding some white or darker by adding some black. Since we're working in watercolor, which is a transparent medium, I rarely go up here. If I want a pale version of my color, what I'm going to do instead is make it less opaque rather than adding white to it. This would be like using an opaque color maybe an acrylic or gouache. So if you do work with gouache or acrylic, you might actually add white to your paint. But for us in watercolor, I would be more likely to stay in this lower third where I'm making my color darker perhaps, but then I will use the opacity of the color to change how light it is. So if I want the color to be paler, what I'll do is make it less opaque. You can think of this as adding water to your paint. So let's go over here somewhere in the bluish range and come down so it's a blue-gray. And then we want to click anywhere in the screen to turn that off. And now let's choose how big we want our airbrush to be and how opaque we want the paint to be. So there are two ways to do this. On the little oval shaped selector, if I click inside that part that shows the tool, it shows an option for changing the size and for the opacity. So we can set them with those menus. Or we can go over on the left side of the screen where all the tools are, and the top tab changes the size, and the bottom tab changes how opaque it is. So this is where I find it easier to set my size because I can see how big it's going to be compared to my photograph. And now I can come over to my photograph and simply take my stylus and scribble on top of my photo. And when I do that, I realize, oh, that's really too blue. I don't really want to put that color in there. So if you make a change and you decide right away, nope, I don't like that, you can use the undo button, which will remove the previous brush stroke, and a brush stroke is everything you did without lifting the stylus off the screen. So since I did that whole scribble without lifting the stylus, that undid everything. So I really like to use a color that's already in my painting. So what I'm going to do is tap again in that color selector and tap the little eyedropper icon, and this gives me a little set of crosshairs that I can see the color of individual pixels and move it around and choose the color that I want from the painting itself. So that's a much grayer color. That looks a lot better. Let's give that a try. So now the colors are much more similar to the colors in my painting, and that gives me a better idea of whether I would like to make this change by adding a wash of color to the bottom of these clouds. Now that doesn't look like a watercolor wash exactly. It's a little too even for a watercolor wash, especially here where I have a lot of granulating colors. But remember, I'm not trying to create a digital version of a watercolor. I'm just trying to make some quick changes so that I can decide would I like to do that change on my painting. So let your eyes be a little unfocused or squint your eyes a little bit when you look at it. Don't get too involved in trying to make it look exactly like a watercolor. To evaluate whether I like this change, what I can do is come over to the Layers menu and click the little eye icon in that layer to make the layer invisible. Then I can click it again to make it visible. So by turning it on and off, I can give myself a chance to compare the two versions and decide if I'd like to make that change. Yes? No? Yes? No? Now suppose I'm also considering another change. Suppose I'm thinking maybe I want to add some darker area to the cloud, and maybe I want to add a little figure underneath that tree. So to add a little figure underneath that tree, let's use a separate layer so that I can consider the two changes individually. So I'll come to the Layers palette and I'll choose the plus sign to put another clear empty layer on top. So this is like another piece of acetate, and now my two changes will be on separate layers so I can consider them individually. To draw my little person under the tree, I'm going to use the pencil tool. So let's go up and select the pencil tool. And now I want to choose a color that's more like the color under the tree, the color of the tree. So let's come down here and choose that really dark green, almost a black. Now, scribbling a tiny little person under that tree is really kind of tough. So what I'm going to do is use gestures to make the whole thing a lot bigger so I can work much more easily down there underneath that tree. Now I'm going to go over to my pencil tool and decide on a size that looks reasonable. Opacity, I usually leave it at 100% for a pencil. And now I simply scribble my little person. I think that pencil's still a little big. Let's make it a little smaller. So I'll undo that first couple of brush strokes, and now that's a better size. Scribble my little silhouette of a person. And again, I don't have to be too precise because remember, this is not my painting that I'm working on here, and this is not digital art that I'm doing here. I'm just trying to get an idea of, do I want to make a little silhouette of a person underneath that tree? So I draw him very rough, and then I can use gestures to reposition everything, drag it with my two fingers, and now I can consider these two layers individually. I can turn off the layer with the person and look at just the cloud changes. I can turn off the layer with the cloud and try the person. Yes, no, yes, no. Both changes, just one change. By turning layers on and off, I can quickly evaluate whether I would like to make these changes. Now, you might be thinking, okay, that's all great, but I don't think I could draw the little silhouette of the person there. I'm terrible at drawing people. And Sketchbook Pro is great for that situation too. So let's turn off all these layers so we're not distracted by them. And I'm going to go to the Add Image button again and bring in a different image that has some people in it. And I don't think I need to resize that. It's in the correct orientation, so I'm just going to click Done. And now I will add another clear piece of acetate on top of this photo, choose my pencil tool, and zoom in a bit so I can draw more easily. Check the size. And now I can either trace the outline of this figure, or in this case, because I'm considering just adding a silhouette, what I'm going to do is make my pencil a little bigger and just scribble in, fill in the entire silhouette. If we were adding this to a postcard, he'd be pretty tiny on the postcard. We don't need any of those details. But if you were adding him in a larger form to another painting, you could use this to trace the outline of the figure and then print it out and transfer it to your painting. So I think that's good enough for our purposes. So now what I will do is go back over here and turn off the layer that has the photograph in it, so that's invisible, and turn back on the one with my painting. Now, I don't really want that figure standing up in the sky, but when I try to move him with gestures, it moves the entire image. So what I need to do instead is select just my little sketch of the figure. So I'm going to make sure I have that layer selected so that I'm working in the layer with my sketch. I'm going to go up here and click on the selection tool. I'll use the rectangular selection and I'll just draw a box around him. And now he's been selected. And then I can choose the Move and Transform tool and use gestures to move just that selected portion of my image. So I can move him over here. I can move him over here, make him small, see what I think about having him there. I can also say, well, what if I made him bigger and moved him over here and kind of put him more in the foreground? Would I like that better? So this allows me to test various changes of just one piece of the sketch or one piece of my proposed painting. And also, I could bring in sketches of various other things. Suppose I want to put this person in another scene or in a sketch that I'm using for planning another painting. So this allows me to use several different layers to bring in different elements. I could say, what about this guy in the foreground and another person underneath the tree? So all of these layers allow me to test different aspects of my painting, changes that I might like to make, or to build sketches out of different elements and combine them in Sketchbook Pro to design a painting that I'm going to paint. And that's really all the features that I use when I'm working in Sketchbook Pro. There are lots of other things you can do with this, but that's all you need to get started. So now let's have a look at the phone version. If I want to save my work to come back to it, I can click this little icon that looks like a document with some lines of bulleted text, and that gives me a menu that allows me to create a new sketch, go to the gallery of images that I've already saved, share my work. So if I click New Sketch or Gallery, I get a menu that gives me an option to create a new sketch or gives me an option to go to the gallery, and then I can either save the current sketch or discard the current sketch. If I want to just save this to my Photos app, for example, to send it to someone in an email or print it out, I can click the Share button, and then if I choose Save Image, that will save it to my Photos. In this section, I'm going to show the same features of Sketchbook Pro in the phone version. I honestly don't find the phone version all that convenient to use. The screen is usually a little bit too small, but if you have a very large size phone, or if you're traveling and this is kind of all that's available to you, it is workable. You can do it. They've done a pretty nice job of laying out the tools so that you have a clean palette to work on, but you can find what you need. So again, we want to bring in the photo of the painting that we're considering making changes to. So to do that, I'm going to click the icon that looks like the little compass and ruler, and that opens up tools that have to do with the whole screen, and the one I want is Import Image. So when I click that, that allows me to go to my photos, find the image that I want. I'm going to use this image of a previous postcard paint-along to test out some ideas. Now, if the image comes in this orientation, that's a little small and I'd like to have it turned sideways. And if you simply rotate your phone, it doesn't automatically reorient while you're in Sketchbook Pro. So we're going to reorient this image before we start drawing on it. And to do that, I'm going to use this little circle-shaped icon. Once I've clicked on that, I can use these arrows to nudge it up and down, but I can also just use my hands, 2 fingers, and drag and resize with gestures, just like you would in most programs that work with images. And when I have it turned sideways and positioned on the screen, then I'm going to check the little check mark to say I'm done. And now I'm back in the drawing interface. The next icon over that looks like a little marker tip with a slider underneath is my Tools menu. And I use primarily 2 tools, the Airbrush tool and the Pencil tool. So I'm going to stay with the Airbrush tool. And I can set various settings within this menu if I like, the size and opacity of the tool, but there are easier ways to get to those settings while we're drawing. So we're just going to choose the tool that we want, the Airbrush tool, and click the little X to turn that menu off. So now we'd like to try out some possible changes to our photo. And to do this, instead of drawing directly on the photo, it's nice to draw on another layer so that I can remove those changes if I don't like them and try something else. So this little icon that looks like two sheets of paper floating over each other is the layers menu. And right now what I have is the background layer, and that is there so that I can change the color of the background, but since we work on white paper, I rarely do that, so I generally leave the background layer alone. And then there is an empty layer, and then there is our image layer. I would like the empty layer on top of the image layer, so what I do is click and hold, it pops out, and then I can simply drag it up and drop it on top of my image layer. So you can think of this empty layer as a clear sheet of acetate that you've put on top of your photograph. So you do all your drawing on the acetate, and then if you don't like it, you can get rid of it, you can add another piece of acetate. So we're going to make sure this layer is selected before we start drawing. And then we're going to use our airbrush tool to ask ourselves if we want to add some more color to the clouds. So I'm going to tap anywhere in the screen to get rid of that layers menu. I'm going to turn my phone sideways so I can look at this a little more easily and draw on it a little more easily. And now I want to adjust the color and size and opacity of my tool. So I can do that with the tools menu at the top, but an easier way to do it on a phone is to click this little circular icon at the bottom, and that pulls out a little oval that has information about the tool that I'm using. It tells me what tool I'm using, and it tells me the color that I'm using with that tool. I'm going to click in this lower circle, and this brings up a menu where I can change the hue, and I can change the color. I can make it lighter or darker, brighter or duller. When you make it whiter with this tool, that's like adding white paint. So since we work in watercolor, I generally stay in the lower portion of this diamond, and then I make it less opaque instead of making it more white. So if you make it lighter by adding white, that's like adding gouache or white acrylic or something to your paint. So I only do that if I'm really going to add opaque paint. Otherwise, I'm going to stay down here. We'll just choose kind of a dark blue. Click the little X to get rid of that. And then the upper part of this oval tells me what tool I'm using, and it allows me to adjust the size and the opacity. So if I click in the upper part, I get sent back to the tool menu where I can use the settings on the tool menu to change the size and change how opaque it is. But I can also change the size and opacity simply by clicking and holding in that icon and then moving my finger up and down on the screen, which changes the opacity. So let's set it at about 50%. If I click and hold and move my finger left and right, that changes the size. So let's make it about that size. Now I'll click the X to get rid of all of that. Now that I've selected the size and color and opacity that I want for my airbrush, I can go back and use my finger and simply scribble on the screen to add that color on the bottom side of my clouds. And as soon as I do that, I realize, oh no, I chose a color that's much too blue. So I don't want that anymore, and I'm going to click on the little circle menu, and that also brings up my undo and redo buttons. So I'm going to click undo, and when I click undo, it undoes the previous brush stroke, and a brush stroke is everything you did without lifting your finger off the screen. So since I did all that scribbling with my fingers staying on the screen, didn't lift it off, that's considered one brush stroke, and all of that goes away, which is great. So what I'd really like to do most of the time is choose a color that's actually already in my painting. So instead of using the color wheel to choose the color of my tool, what I'm going to do is again click the little wheel-shaped icon in the bottom, and this time I'm going to click the tool that looks like an eyedropper. And that gives me some little crosshairs that allow me to choose the color of an individual pixel in my painting or in my photograph. So let's see, let's use kind of a dark gray. And now if I were to look again at my color menu, you see that the color of my tool has been changed to that dark gray. So let's try now using our finger to kind of scribble. And that looks a lot more like something that might be the kind of color I could mix on my palette. Now, it doesn't look like watercolor wash. This is a little airbrush tool, so it's more even than a watercolor wash would be. But I'm not trying to create a digital version of a watercolor. I'm just trying to test out ideas and see if I like them or not. So sort of squint your eyes or let your eyes go a little unfocused to judge, do I like it with a little more dark gray down there or not? One nice feature of this program is if I click again on the layers menu, each layer has a little eyeball symbol, and if I click the little eyeball symbol, it turns that layer off. So I can turn it on, make it visible, or make it invisible. And this is one of the disadvantages to the phone version. The layers menu is kind of covering up my image, so I might have to make my image smaller so that when I bring out my layers menu, I can actually see everything as I make my changes. But it gives me a chance to see, do I like a little extra dark down there or not? Turn it off. Turn it on. Now suppose I'm considering making another change. Perhaps I'm thinking about adding a little person under that tree. I'd like to do that on a separate layer so I can consider those changes individually. So in the layers menu, I'm going to click the plus sign, and that gives me another empty layer to work on. So I'll make sure that layer is selected. I'm going to get rid of the layers menu and resize things and come back over here and open up my little tool menu again. And this time I want to select a different tool, so I'll click in the upper part that gives me my tool selections. And let's click Library to get back to our tool library and choose the pencil tool. And again, I can set the size and opacity of my pencil tool here. Let's make it 100% opaque. And I can see how big my pencil is. Let's set it right about there. Or I can change those settings as we did for the airbrush tool by clicking and holding and moving my finger left and right to change the size, or up and down to change the opacity. I want to leave it 100% opacity. So now I've selected my pencil tool, but drawing a tiny little person under that tree is going to be pretty hard on a phone screen with my finger. However, I can use gestures to zoom way in and get this section right under the tree. And now I'm going to use my little eyedropper tool to choose this kind of a dark gray-green, almost black. I'll make sure I have my pencil selected. And now that I've chosen this, now that I'm zoomed way in, I might want to have a look at how big my pencil is. It's quite large, so let's make it smaller since we're working here on our super close-up view. And now I'm just going to scribble with my finger on the screen to make the little silhouette of a person underneath this tree. Now, honestly, I find this pretty tough to do with my finger, but if you have a small stylus, it's not too bad. And if I need to, I can zoom in even more. Now, I know that's pretty crude, but when we zoom back out, you can see that actually it's not bad standing in for the idea of a little person underneath the tree. So again, I can resize things, pull out my layers menu, turn it off, turn it back on, and decide, do I want that little person or not? Now, you might think, okay, there's no way I can draw a little person like that. I could never do that. So here's another way you can use this tool. So let's turn off all those layers so they don't distract us, and go back again to the tool that looks like a compass and ruler and select Import Image again. And this time I'm going to bring in the image of a person, a photograph of a person, and I will rotate it so that I can work with it more easily on my screen and check the check mark. And now I'm going to use my layers menu to add another clear piece of acetate on top of this photograph. I'll zoom in on this figure right here, and I'll use my pencil tool to just scribble on top of him. And since I want to just fill him in, I could probably use my pencil in a bigger size. So let's make it bigger. That looks like a good size. And now I will simply scribble with my finger to fill him in. And again, doing it with a finger is kind of tough, so a stylus might be better for this. But to get a rough idea of adding a little tiny person to a postcard, it's not bad. Now that I've filled him in, let's go back to the layers menu and turn off this layer and turn on our photo layer. Well, he's kind of a giant. Let's turn off the layers menu by clicking anywhere in the layers menu. Now what I'd like to do is move just that person. I don't really want him standing up in the sky. I'm going to once again choose the menu that looks like a ruler and compass, and I'll choose selection. And then instead of the little lasso, I want the rectangular selection box, so I'm going to click on the lasso, choose the rectangle, and then draw a box around this guy. Now I'll turn that menu off, and he's been selected. And again, I'm going to click the compass and ruler, and this time I'll choose transform. And now I can resize and reposition just the person I have selected from just the menu that was active, so I can resize him and stick him underneath the tree. Or I could move him over here and say, what about if I put him in the foreground? Would I like that better? So this allows me to take just one element and change it around, move it and reposition it, decide if I want it somewhere else. And also I can build sketches this way out of different layers that I have drawn on and put the elements together in different ways. So when I get him where I think I want him, that looks good, I'll click the check box and I'm back to my drawing screen. So finally, if I'd like to save my work, I'm going to click on this icon that looks like a little document, and I get the choices to make a new sketch, go to the gallery, share this, or preferences. So if I'd like to save this to my photos, I can click share. Save image, that will save it to my photos. Or if I want to save it, I can click gallery, and it will give me the option to either save the current sketch in the gallery or discard the current sketch and have a new blank canvas so I can work some more. So let's click Save Current Sketch, and now it's saved, and I can go try something different. So there you have it, Sketchbook Pro in the desktop version, the tablet version, the phone version. A great little tool for planning. You only need those few things. When you just watch the video, it's a little overwhelming, but as soon as you start playing with it, I think you'll find it pretty intuitive. If you want to dive deeper, please see the Sketchbook Pro tutorials by Autodesk. The link will be down in the video description. Don't ask me because this is kind of everything I know about Sketchbook Pro, but I've been using it quite successfully as a planning tool for a long time without needing any more than this. So I hope that gets you started and you have fun planning paintings with Sketchbook Pro, and I'll see you the next time. Happy painting!